gently tail off. Great, well, welcome everyone. Welcome to Patch. Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Freddie. I'm your host this evening for the discussion. Plenty of familiar faces, so hello and welcome back to some of those of you I've seen before. And even bigger welcome to those of you for whom this is the first time you're here at Patch. I want to thank also our panel, who I'll introduce shortly, and about whom I'm sure you've read a fair amount in advance of coming this evening. In fact, no doubt that's why you're here this evening. And I just wanted to, before we start, explain what Patch is, because that may not actually be obvious to everyone here. So, hands up if you have been to Patch before. Okay, so the team aren't allowed to put their hands on. It's about half. That's great. That's a mix that I really like to see, because we're trying to always engage and involve more and more people in who we are and what we do. So for those who don't know, we are predominantly here at Patch a workspace. I should say that. If I didn't say it earlier, I'm the founder of Patch myself, so I should know this. And if you were to go upstairs, you would find a mixture of offices and flexible work environments and flexible chairs and fixed desks and so on. And we feature charities, businesses, people who work from home, everything between, all of the community and so on. But Patch is also a place of discovery, a place of exploration, a place of learning, and a place of exchange. And I think with that in mind, we run regular events here, be it crochet or, I always start with the crochet examples. It's the first series of events that happen here with crochet. We also have Women in Business event. We have the Chelmsford Council meet up here, which is called Ignite, that happens on a regular basis. We run our own events, such as all of those that you can see behind us. But I think most compelling, most powerful is actually not what Patch ourselves runs, but actually what our community of members and friends run here as well. So whether that's pop-up retail and experiments we're running for people to come in and sell their own wares locally, or whether it's any of the events or the activities that I've mentioned and many others in between. We've got the BBC coming this Saturday. They're taking over the whole building, over 100 people for a series of workshops on new music. Patch is a place that is open, accessible, welcoming for everyone. And most importantly, Patch is here. It's on the high street, and it's for you. And that is not a pun, Sarah, on the bid Chelmsford for you, but we are here as a place on Chelmsford High Street that welcomes all of you. So I'm really glad you've all been able to come this evening. So thank you very much. Today we are launching a new series of events which we are calling Patch Seasons. And Patch Seasons is a revolving set of themes that we think will iterate every 6 months or so on different landmark topics that allow us to anchor a series of talks and events. And the first season, indeed the very first event, is tonight, and the first season is Planet and Sustainability. And I mentioned earlier that we're here in Chelmsford, if you hadn't already noticed, but that is important to us because we're picking up on the local theme of events like Gaia, which Katie was involved with running. You may have seen at the cathedral, an amazing 3D art installation of the Earth. Ignite, I mentioned earlier, running a series of ran a related sustainability event here not too long ago. Chelmsford for You, again, the local business improvement district group ran Green City Week, which some of you may have engaged with over the summer. And so this is our first ever seasons event, and we've got some more coming up, but it's very timely. For those of you who follow these things, you may remember we had COP26 last year, which is the UN organised gathering of governments worldwide trying to coordinate the world on climate change. COP27 is next week, or week after next. And so it feels like a sort of an appropriate moment in the global context as well as with what is happening locally. In terms of other events that we've got coming up, we've got our Patch Seasons Market, which happens to be on the wall behind me, which again is sustainability from a different angle. That's about locally sourced makers who are, I think, about 15 different stalls of people who all come from within the Chelmsford environment, bringing things that you can buy for Christmas. And we also have our sustainability stories from small businesses, a women-only panel of early stage entrepreneurs here again from Chelmsford. That's on the 23rd of November. So that is Patch, that is Seasons, that is the kind of broader context, and here tonight we're here to talk about creating sustainable change. The framing, I think, is quite broad. Sustainability means many, many things, and I think it will mean different things in different contexts to our speakers and also to you this evening. So I think our goal this evening is to try and pin down not only the different interpretations of sustainability, what that means to us, and we all, I think, come from different perspectives on that, but also trying, if we can, to isolate specific, tangible examples of how that is played out in our lives and what we are doing, what we can be doing to be part of that sustainable change narrative, be it within the environment, which I think is the obvious interpretation, but also across everything from mental health to supply chain challenges, operational practices, and the way that we kind of treat each other as local communities as well. So the most important thing of all is that you, the audience, interrogate these questions in your own mind, and I want you all to be coming with lots and lots of questions at the end. I think the questions is always the most interesting part of evenings like this. So hands up if you have a question already. You don't have to ask it. I'm interested in the question count before talk. No one has come prepared. Okay, good. Patch team, okay, excellent. Please do generate questions, and I'm sure we'll have lots to read through as you hear it. So, with all of that, I'm going to sit down and shut up, and I'm going to hand over to our amazing panel here, who will start with a brief introduction of themselves, and we will go from there. So, I will hand over first to Merve.
Yeah, so I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of a company called Hived. I'm building a parcel delivery network for the 21st century, which is entirely emission-free, a 10x better service. I'm sure many of you have experienced problems with your parcel delivery, so we're here to fix that. I started the company roughly around exactly 2 years ago, actually. It was 2-year birthday the other day, and grown quite a lot since then.
So I'm John. I founded Innocent Drinks way back in 1999 with two friends from college. Ran it as CEO for 15 years through various ups and downs, and in 2013 it became Europe's biggest juice company, and we sold it to Coca-Cola. Since then, founded Jam Jar Investments, and we invest in early stage businesses in consumer brands that are trying to make the world a little bit better.
Camilla, I'm the founder of an investment fund called ECA. We set up ECA specifically to invest in founders that want to create a positive change in the world. So we're focused on investing in companies that either have an environmental or sustainable aspect or a sort of social aspect focused on mainly consumerization of health. And I guess we really set up ECA because we were lucky enough to work with some brands that some of you guys might know, like Not on the High Street, Blue and Wild, Gusto, and we sort of saw the power that those founders had of what they wanted to do to change the world and wanted to be a fund specifically for backing the next generation of those founders. Very lucky to be an investor in Hived and Merve, who describes, a great example.
So healthcare, carbon-free delivery, consumer products, there's lots of different perspectives here, but I think the thing that probably connects the panel is, thinking to the title here, is the creation part. These are all founders of businesses, and I'd be interested to know from each of you, perhaps Merve starting with you, what one example you think that you're setting in your business that can establish sustainable change or create sustainable change that you'd like others to follow?
I think for us, when we set out to build the parcel delivery network for the 21st century, it was like climate change and sustainability was like table stakes. So every decision that we made and how we're going about the business had to be that, default and upfront. So I think for everyone, creating a business and everything, I think that is just as important as sort of your business plan, as your hiring plan, as all those things. So that's the biggest piece of advice I can give. I think businesses, there's a huge opportunity. There's a big problem with climate change, but also presents a huge opportunity as well. And I think you have to incorporate it in everything you're thinking about, every decision, and every plan that you're making.
John?
I think kind of talking about Innocent, the immediate thing everybody looks at is the kind of the packaging and the nutrition. The biggest impact Innocent actually has is coming in its supply chain and the way that fruit is grown across the world, the kind of the standards that Innocent looks for, and the practices that can be introduced to decrease water usage or reduce other inputs that are required. And I guess for us, the kind of thing we learned was the excitement not of finding a a grower who met all the shiny certification standards, but all the growers who didn't but wanted to, and to work with those guys to kind of take them on that journey and therefore kind of make change that way rather than I guess the kind of more visible front end. So a lot of Innocent's work now is that work kind of out in the field, changing those standards and then helping other growers and other companies kind of do the same.
I think we sort of probably think about it in two different ways. So one is on the sort of daily, like micro sort of side of things, of trying to help the companies that we're invested into make better decisions every day. So I think the sustainability one is a really great point. Like there's often a discussion of should we invest a bit more upfront in innovation. So for example with Gusto, there was a big debate about packaging. So you could buy packaging very cheaply and short term, that was great, margins looked really fantastic, or you can invest very heavily into some sort of quite novel types of packaging that reduce food waste. And so we want to be the sort of partner that will have that discussion with you and then stand up to the rest of the board around like why it makes sense to invest in sustainability. And then this sort of second like aspect of it that we think about as sort of ICA itself as a business is we would really love to prove out that backing businesses that have this sort of mission or purpose also generates better financial returns. So even if you're somebody that doesn't care about these things, you still want to invest in this space because you know it's going to help you do better over time. So we sort of micro and macro, I guess.
I think that relationship between what Merva said and what you said, and thinking about is very interesting. Think about your investors who themselves will presumably be larger institutions, maybe slightly older world, maybe people who aren't on the ground creating the sustainable change that Merva is. So this is a, well, perhaps you could tell a little part of the story about how ICA, I think, has been riding that wave. I mean, it's obviously a personal passion of yours, the sustainability element, but clearly it's a business opportunity as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think when we started, we literally had somebody, so we'd done lots of consumer investing before. We went to speak to a potential investor and they literally said to us, they were like, oh, you should have a think about this. It sounds like you guys have just gone rogue. Why don't you go back, rethink about it, and come back and speak to us? They are, thankfully, they are an investor in the fund, quite an important one for our investors. But 2 years later, they're now asking us to sort of run sessions for all of their other managers, thinking about how you embed sustainability, how you think about ESG, what the benefits of B Corp are. So I think we've really seen this like radical shift happen in quite a short space of time. And it's super exciting to see, and it's really from entrepreneurs like Merva that's like driving that change, because they're seeing that these businesses are growing faster, attracting better talent, really performing better than some of the companies that they've sort of seen before.
Do you think you could have started Hive 5 years ago?
Oh, I think the venture appetite might have been
From that perspective,
looked
from
at
the
different
commercial aspect.
lens. Yeah, looked at different lens, and I think probably not, to be fair, in terms of maybe, but you wouldn't go. There might be some interest because the market is big enough and to take it that way. But I think for us, we're making quite difficult sometimes going the harder way because we've gone all electric fleet, etc. Right, we're having to innovate, do a lot of R&D, and to have maybe some patient investors who understand that we're putting in this extra hard work right now, as opposed to just focusing on maybe just doing it an easier way, right, instead of just getting fossil fuel vehicles or where there's infrastructure already set up. I think it's important that we had investors that back that as well, that can support us in our mission and line. That was super important for us. And both investors, ICA and the different investors that we got, we made sure that we were mission aligned, that they would be supportive of the harder decisions that we would take and the going about it just generally the hard way to kind of create that change, which was super important for us.
And John, how does this relate to your experience if you go back to starting Innocent? I mean, could you imagine Hive being set up when you set up Innocent, and what were the challenges that you found when you were trying what back then I think was probably quite crazy stuff around the sustainable supply chain you mentioned?
Well, I guess it wasn't an investor's radar. It wasn't on our radar. If you look at our business plan from which we wrote in '98, there wouldn't be anything in there about sustainability, about carbon or plastic or water usage or energy or anything like that. But I guess as three friends, what we set out to do was to create a business we were proud of. That was written there, and we internally had the rocking chair test, which is kind of theoretical sense of when we're sat in the rocking chair, in our later years, are we proud of all the decisions we made? And that was all that existed. And then we kind of got going with the business, and I guess our mission was to make it easy for people to do themselves some good, so produce a healthier product. That was the positive contribution we were making. And then as we started doing that and the things started scaling, you begin to realise the things that you touch and the impact that you have. And you know, the first thing that came onto our radar, I think, was the carbon footprint, and so we went through a process of trying to work out what that was when everybody was trying to work out, you know, kind of what it was, and that was the very first kind of wave that came through, and then it moved into plastic, became the kind of, you know, the sort of next area of focus. So kind of, I guess, over the years there's been a kind of shift of things, but you know, 25 years ago it wasn't there at all, and now, you know, my kind of investing role, it is, you know, it's a kind of requirement. You're not going to be able to launch a consumer product that it may not be as kind of category leading and defining as what's happening here, but if it isn't part of the mix, then, you know, it's not a proposition you can even embark on.
And how has that, so there's sort of two angles to this I think we're exploring. So one is around the investment angle, which you've touched on, and which both Camilla and Merva have touched on, which is investors want to see it, but from a consumer angle, from the messaging perspective, is the point that you can't survive as a brand unless that's visible.
Well, I think if you are something new, people expect it, and it's an entry criteria. Yeah. And therefore it's increasingly hard for it to be your lead differentiator, because everybody who's bringing a product to market is going to try and do the same. Obviously, some people do it far better and to a far greater degree, but it's it's an entry requirement.
Does that sound scary, Matt? All of a sudden?
No, I agree. I agree with what I said at the start. Is when we started out to build a parcel delivery network, USP is not entirely emission free. It's just like, okay, you have to take that approach, that it has to be emission free from the start. But that's just baked into the business model. That's just baked into the business, and I think I completely agree. Every business, it just has to be baked in. It's not going to be a USP because it's not a differentiator anymore. It's just table stakes at this point. But it's having that baked in a sensible way from the start, and everything coming together. It's just as important as every part of your business now.
I mean, it's much easier to do it if you do it from the start.
Yeah,
it's so hard to convince once you have a business system up and running, to convince people to change it, to engineer something back in is way too painful.
Well, it even came through in the way that you introduced Hive. You know, I sort of went to carbon-free, emission-free delivery, and actually, that's not your pitch at all. Your pitch is it's better. Yeah,
it's just a better version of a parcel delivery network. 10x better in all the way, and no emissions is part of that as well. Yeah. So it's not the USP. It's not a differentiator. It's just table stakes.
Camilla, I know that you've recently been through the process of setting up ECA as a B Corporation. Perhaps you could explain what that means, why you did it, why you went through it. It seems related.
Yeah, definitely. So B Corporation is sort of originated from the US, and it was this business standard where they tried to have a whole range of, I guess, different sort of inputs around the environment, how you think about diversity inclusion, how you sort of structure yourself as a business to be socially responsible, and then they score companies against a scorecard, and you get a score, and if you're over a certain number, then you're an accredited sort of B Corp. So it's really taken off in the last few years. I think as a result, there's now a long waiting list to become a B Corp in the UK. So I think the reason that we decided to do it is that we ask all of the investments that we make to report on certain sort of impact KPIs, and we felt if we were asking other people to do that, we should definitely have some way of keeping ourselves accountable to it, and we wanted to sort of be accountable on a standard that other people sort of understand and is very, very public, so you can sort of Google it and our score comes up, and so we think that really means that we have to keep ourselves to account over time. We would highly recommend it. There's quite a lot of evidence to suggest B Corp brands are outperforming non-B Corp brands, so I think that comes back to this point about brands being sort of started with a great mission, building in a really sort of great way. I would say that with a slight health warning, which is why we definitely don't sort of recommend or force any of our investments to do it, is it is a very time-consuming process, and so, you know, we think about it as if you're a brand that wants to do it, it's really amazing, but it doesn't mean that you're a non-sustainable brand or a non-socially responsible brand if you don't do it. I think to the point that you talked about having all the sort of shiny sort of labels, you know, I think some people do it for the labeling, so you can go onto the website and just do a sort of test version, and I think that is really helpful because it flags up a whole load of things that you might not have thought about that you can implement really quickly. If you do go through the process, it's a 12 to 18 month process. It's easier if you're a small brand, it gets harder as you get a bigger brand, so some benefits of doing it early.
Yeah, but I mean the learning of going through it, because it's such a 360-degree kind of view of everything, and every company suddenly discovers there's a whole field you've kind of not looked at, and it gets harder every year, and Innocent has tried every type of different certification for different bits of its business, and it's definitely been the toughest and the most valuable, and but a ton of resource. So Innocent has a load of beekeepers, and each beekeeper is responsible for the B Corp area of that business, and delivering performance within it.
I think this point about messaging, I think, is interesting for B Corp. And I say that as we are also going through B Corp certification process, and I know that there are some very sort of vocal opponents of B Corp, not as a concept, not as an idea, but as effectively, to sort of paraphrase someone I can think of, quite prominent startup founder said something to the effect of, we don't need B Corp certificate. We don't need to waste time in B Corp certification to prove that we're good. We just do good. And it's certainly been something on my mind. I think within the kind of broader real estate sector that you might say that we operate in, we're in a patch building here. I think there's a lot of sort of panic, frankly, amongst real estate owners and developers about ESG, environment, social governance awareness, which is a similar sort of framing, I suppose, to one way to frame some of the considerations of B Corp. And there's a lot of kind of, I don't know what greenwashing is for sustainability more broadly, but I think there's a lot of kind of risks that these sort of flags are waved. I'd be interested to get your view on it. My view is, and I think where we landed internally as a company at Patch is like, yeah, we do believe that we are doing really good and important things. I mean, I hope that's true, and it is fundamental to not only to who we attract as customers, but actually who we attract into work for the company as well. I think having that kind of core sense of almost like an external measure of your sort of compass in a way, I think is a very helpful arbiter. But where we landed internally was that, yes, these things may be true about it takes up a lot of time, but frankly, like, I haven't got a better idea of how to move the world forward. And if that means that some people are going to free ride and wave the flag and say, look at us, we're a B Corp, and I can think of examples in our industry which frustrate me, but at the same time, do you know what, like, if the conversation moves from over here to kind of over here, and it's a bit messy as we go, fine. I don't want to have an academic debate about whether it's exactly the right way of doing it. And it felt like for us that it was a clear way of making an investment that just says, do you know what, we believe that there's a better way of doing business, which I think in the B Corp language is, I should get this right, triple bottom line of not just shareholders, which technically, legally, most companies that's the only thing that they're beholden to is the interest of the shareholders, but also to broader stakeholders and the environment.
Yeah, you've got to change your articles of association, right?
Yes.
So it's pretty fundamental.
Yeah, if only the lawyers saw that in a more sustainable, financially sustainable way, that would be very helpful. Mo, I think, are you also considering something? I don't know if you're a living wage employer for a start.
Yeah, but we had the same initial thing of like, where, we don't need certification, we're doing good, but then actually when we looked into it more and more, it helps you, like you said, do a 360 and other elements of the business where you might have had a blind spot to or something. And to your point, as we're starting to grow to a team of, we're at 30 now, but we'll be continuing to grow it. It's, maintain that standards as we grow and holding the whole team to accountability. So that's the main reason why we actually shifted our decision to do it, and probably because when we started the company, there was just two of us and we were a bit busy. And now we have a little bit more people and resources to spend on it. So it's definitely something that we're looking into.
Yeah. So shifting gears a little bit, coming back to the title, Creating Sustainable Change. I mentioned at the beginning that we've got a panel of creators here, of innovators and startup founders, and I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about your own kind of founding story, and in particular this point around not making any cycling puns here, but this point around accelerating that rate of change. My sense is that if we go back to that sort of strive for 1.5 or pray for 1.5, the rate of global warming by the middle of the century, we're struggling. We have to, whatever we're doing now, we have to do a hell of a lot faster. And I've just seen a whole, and again, I mentioned COP27 coming up. We are really not moving fast enough. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your story and specifically what you have seen as a new business, what has changed, and why we can believe in that accelerated pace of change.
I think growing up, my family table discussions were always around business. My family had small business and thing. I think I always had quite a strong entrepreneurial streak inside me. And I always knew from a very early age, 15, 16, I wanted to create my own business. But as you're becoming 17, 18, and I think I was reading more about climate change, sustainability and everything, and I looked, I always thought if I did want to create a business, it's going to definitely have the impact of both in, right?
Mm.
That actually you can combine the both together, and I felt very strongly about that in my early 20s when I was exploring more what I wanted to do. First initial idea that we had didn't turn out to be super successful, but it ended up turning into Hive, right? And that's part of the process, part of the challenge. But I think I was always very determined to kind of combine both, like creating a huge business with sustainable impact and trying to transform a whole huge dirty industry. The emissions from transportation are huge, and we knew that e-commerce was going through the roof, and the logistics associated with that. So I was like, huge problem, huge climate problem.
When was this?
This was 2020, just before the
Okay.
pandemic. And then I think, as you all know, during the pandemic, trying to order online, it was just huge. And I was already tinkering with the idea of a parcel delivery for the previous business that we had. And I think the pandemic just exacerbated all the problems with our current logistics system and how fragile it was and on paper thin. And also cycling. I never cycled before the pandemic. I think trying to cycle in London was always very daunting to me. Where I live in Manchester, I would cycle, and I cycled to and from school at times, right? But London never picked up a bike. I was always too scared. Not even the Santander bike. It was like, all these buses, it's just not happening. No.
Very sensible.
Yeah, it was just a huge fear I had. And then pandemic happened, and I was like, all the roads are quiet. I live in central London, so I was like, oh, the roads are quiet. I could probably cycle now. And then picked up cycling, and then I realised how much I loved it and how much I enjoyed it and how much easier and better and quicker and everything it was. And that also led to a lot of the kind of how we use bikes at Hive, and realising how much more quicker, how much more efficient, and obviously the impact on the environment on that. So that was a huge sort of like, it was a weird time. I remember in January 2020, February 2020, I was like, this is what I'm going to do, parcel delivery. Pandemic hit, parcel delivery went horrible, everyone was talking about it, and I started cycling. I was like, how can we incorporate all these things together? And yeah, so it was interesting. It was an interesting journey to get there, but the pandemic definitely shifted, I think, a lot of people's behaviour, especially my behaviour. I think when I did have more time to quieten down, slow down, I was being more conscious about where I was shopping. I would probably take an extra walk, go to more an independent store to do my food shopping, as opposed to just quickly go to Sainsbury's. And all those habits I've kind of kept and maintained. And I think a lot of people, my friends, have done the same thing. Lots of my new friends are all cyclists that weren't before. So of course, the pandemic was really bad, but in some ways it was really good, and also kind of fundamental to my founding story journey.
John, how are you seeing this in other consumer attitudes and other consumer brands? This accelerated rate of change. So to me, what's interesting about this is how young Merva's business is, and how it could only have been started not only from a kind of technological standpoint, but also from a consumer need. And the fact that we've accelerated beyond the fact that it's exciting that it's sustainable, and actually the sustainability component almost isn't relevant anymore, it's exciting. Is that a feature that you're seeing through your...
Well, I guess you're saying that, kind of the generational wave of what consumers require, whereas for my generation it wasn't on the radar of consumer products. Now it's a requirement, and most people, in the entrepreneurial space, are starting it at a relatively young age, and their audience is relatively young and therefore demanding it. And so I guess the pace at which that moves through is carrying it and will accelerate.
So I guess
and if you have kids, they demand it of you. That's the other thing you see, is every parent will say, it's my child who's going through the bin, and say, you can't do that, Dad. Why are you? Why have you got
interesting
these?
that in a way Jam Jar is a bit of a canary for what's coming next, you say, because the founders of the businesses that you're investing in, as you say, they're the clue of where the future is going, I guess. I suppose that is effectively the model of early stage investing.
Yes, you're hopefully seeing it 5 or so years before it becomes mainstream. But for us, every consumer product, founders have gone through and said, how do I strip out all the plastic from this, or how do I make this so that it's not disposable anymore, that it's repairable, and so repairable electric toothbrushes and all sorts of things kind of come through. So every bit of the things that we consume and use, some entrepreneur is thinking about how they rewire that and do that as the kind of entry level, but then how they build everything else around it to make it a great business.
Camilla, sorry, I've avoided you slightly, but
No worries at all. You guys are much more interesting, so very happy with that.
well, I wondered if you're not allowed to have favourite investments, I'm sure, but I'm still very interested in this idea of investments and early stage investments, specifically again not something we've all had exposure to on a frequent basis. What you're seeing we've talked about how it's affected what your LPs expect, what the investors in your fund expect. I'm interested to hear what you're saying on other businesses, be they, if not consumer, perhaps B2B as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's just super exciting, is what I would say. I think the quality, so we've been investing since about 2013, and the quality of entrepreneurs and founders that are setting up businesses that want to solve one of these missions is just absolutely extraordinary. And I think the really incredible thing is people come to us with ideas that we never could have imagined. So an example would be John and myself were investors in a business called Urban Legend, and they recreated a donut to be 150 calories, just as tasty as a Krispy Kreme. No one would have said that was not what we would have thought we'd be investing into, but we are, because there's great people building those types of things.
Well, this touches on sustainability maybe in other ways, and it's a bit of an abstract concept, and we've mostly talked about it in terms of, I suppose, environmental impacts. But I'd be interested in hearing what other thoughts any of you have on sustainability in other forms. And I'm going to go first because I actually didn't answer the question I asked you at the beginning, which was, what is the one example that you hope that you're setting within your business? And I think, as I sort of explained at the beginning, I hope that the sustainable impact that we're having here at Patch is actually on communities. And I'd say the sort of shared social capital, the shared sort of mental health, if you will, the shared sense of trying to move away from the sense of community, communities that can have become disparate with the advance of the internet. I feel as though the internet is something that often drives people apart in a way, either because they're looking down at their phones, or because they are more absorbed in their own screens, or I guess for other technologies, so trains, people are going on the train down to London, or elsewhere. And I feel like the sustainability market that's nearby, we're featuring local founders in our sustainability stories from small businesses event, if I haven't put that enough. So I think that's another way that we can and should be thinking about sustainability more broadly. But I wonder if that's a topic that any of you have thought about actively.
I think what I do a lot is I speak to a lot of sustainability founders as well and share learnings, because it's a new thing everyone's working on and figuring out, and new science comes out every day, and it's a challenge for us all, right? And I think we all sometimes hold ourselves to quite high expectation, or quite we all scrutinize quite a lot as businesses, and what you're advertising, what you're marketing, etc. I think what we've done a lot is just speak to other founders who are going through the same thing and share learnings and to get advice, and that's been super helpful. Not just other founders, but just sustainability people who are experts in the field. If someone said to me, actually, you know what, the battery consumption in the vehicle isn't okay, can you educate me and tell me, and just lean into it and just helping people, I think is super important.
Do you think it can be a problematic term because it covers so many different things?
Yeah, definitely. I think sometimes you should almost invite a bit more scrutiny sometimes if you're sort of advertising as, completely emission-free or this and that. So it does invite some form of scrutiny, but we just have to make sure that, we're open, we're honest as a business, that look, we're learning about this as we go. There's a lot to uncover, and there's a lot that we can take learnings from other people, which we do.
Do you find yourself being held to a higher standard because sustainability isn't, in the sort of environmental sense, let's say, is such a feature of your business, and yet, I don't know, perhaps someone will come around and say, well, what about the sustainability of your supply chain, or the sustainability of your team, or your operating practices, or anything else?
Yeah, for sure. And at that point, I've always answered, look, we're trying our hardest, right? We might not be able to do everything perfect. I think there was a month when we moved into our new depot where we didn't have the energy wasn't renewable energy at that point, right? Or there's things that you just sometimes can't control, and you do get more invite scrutiny. But I think our answer always is, look, we're trying our best, but please, if there is something that we're not doing, teach us. And we have that very open on our website. If you can think of something that we're not doing right, please let us know, because the science is very new for some things, and you're always going to find someone who's maybe a bit more well knowledgeable in the specific thing than you are. So I think just being kind and being open and being curious to learn is important.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, the science changes so much. But actually, the great thing is if you are kind of transparent and say this is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it because we believe this to be true.
Exactly.
Then you can people are super accepting of that. I mean, I guess for Innocent, as we talked kind of more and more about this, there was a danger that we became a kind of fruit distribution charity. That what everybody thinks is, what we're trying to get healthy food into everybody, and we're trying to do it in a environmentally sustainable way. And so we, there had to be a big push of which is, it needs to be done in a commercially sustainable way as well. Because if you don't exist as a business, if you're not viable, then the whole thing is pointless anyway.
Yeah.
So, a big part was kind of getting that balance. And so, for Innocent, we encapsulated everything in kind of the 5 values of the business, which was kind of entrepreneurial, responsible, under which sustainability came, generous, natural, and then the last one was commercial. The thing needed to work and be viable. If you wanted to be generous with the proceeds of the profits, which went to the Innocent Foundation, if you wanted to be kind of responsible in terms of how you acted through your supply chain, you also had to be commercial and get the best bloody deal and make sure Tesco's didn't screw you, and everything worked so that you had the money to afford those things. So, I think the danger with, especially in kind of investing in the last 2 years, is there have been so many businesses that are kind of sold on the dream without the viability kind of behind them as well. And then you don't have anything sustainable.
I've got a curveball question, which is I've sort of pre-warned the panel about, and I'm not sure that it's, I don't know if it's going to generate any answers, but we'll give it a go. If it doesn't generate any answers from the panel, then I encourage you all to generate your own answers. And this is the contrarian question, which is, rather than what is, I'll say, do you hold a belief which you think is likely to be controversial amongst members of the panel or indeed the audience on sustainability? Specifically, on sustainability. We hold many controversial.
We'll start with that, and then we'll wind it up.
Someone else give
Well, I think there's a lot of, I guess there's agreement in this space, but there's also a lot of disagreement because, in the world of Innocent, what you package a product in, should it be in glass or card or plastic, no one can, or aluminium, no one can agree on which those are, and there's strong science in kind of all the different areas. I guess what are my personal views? I believe environmentally it will probably go horribly wrong in the midterm, but technologically we'll claw it back in the long term.
Unfortunately, I agree with you.
But I think there's a horrible inevitability to that, or at least in the first part. But I'm a great believer in the second part.
It's tricky that one.
Holder of controversial and difficult beliefs.
I think my only slightly controversial view is probably there's a lot of these sort of resale sort of sites that hold themselves up as being very sustainable, and I think they are really fantastic from the perspective of people can run small micro businesses off them, and there is a really sort of strong social benefit from that side. From a sustainability side, I think we still need to see the data. There's a little bit of evidence that they're just fueling more consumption because people are selling their stuff and then they're getting some money and they're selling even more and buying even more, and that's fueling a new wave of consumption. So that's maybe the only.
This is people continuing exchanging clothing.
Continually exchanging. So if you take Depop, people have built Matt or Vinted. People have built these huge businesses on top of those platforms, and I don't think they're driven by fashion reduction at that point. It's more about enabling more consumption.
Yes, as opposed to kind of built to last model for sustainable fashion.
I think I actually disagree with what you said. So I was like in the whole, I was like a week or two ago, and like my whole belief was 1.5 degree, but it's going to get worse in the short term. But there's so much technology, and there's so much more investment. There's like climate tech funds and loads of innovators and stuff. And then I read the UN report the other day, and it was really doom and gloom. And I was like, the whole past week has been a bit like, I don't know if we're actually going to do it. Like what we actually have to do to get that. It means like every single person making this whole change. And I know I'm still sometimes educating my parents, which is a bit frustrating, right? Or like my parents' generation, which I find frustrating. So I was on the same belief as you about a week or two ago until I looked at the UN report, read a bit more, and I was like, oh, I don't feel as confident anymore, which is quite sad. And so that was my.
Well, as humans, we aren't going to act until we feel the pain.
Exactly.
Right? We're not going to pull the levers hard enough until it goes wrong.
My controversial view, which is entirely unformed because I felt like I should have an answer to this and might get me kicked out of this room / the business, is well, we're here to simulate debate. Or maybe I'll frame it as some people might say, that I think, I do obviously believe myself as an entrepreneur and sitting here with a panel of entrepreneurs, but I'm trying to upset everyone, is that, I do believe that capitalism, broadly speaking, and entrepreneurship is the word I'm looking for, is an extraordinarily powerful force for change. You know, newness, creation, which is, you know, what we're trying to do in our own ways here. I also think that there is and I don't know how it's going to be achieved, but I think there is a massive problem with incentives, and particularly the personal incentives that accrue to people who succeed in that creation of that business, right? And I think you just sort of have to hope. You know, there are sort of so many resources in the world, and you know, the more of those that accrue to specific individuals, you just hope that Elon Musk is a good person. You just hope. You can't control it, and you know, with wealth comes power, and so on. And you know, and a lot of people who gain access to disproportionate levels of wealth and therefore access and control are those who've also done it through entrepreneurship and creativity. Sorry, I'm looking at you in the eyes. So I don't know if that's a controversial belief. Maybe it's a commonly held belief. But I wonder whether we need to fix the underlying economic incentive model around how we operate our society. I mean, goodness knows how that happens. I mean, we can all just implement. Even if donut economics works, I don't know, but we need to perhaps look at something that is more circular.
I just don't think we have enough time for that.
Yeah, I unfortunately also, yeah, anyway, moving on. On the topic of time, don't worry, there is good news to come in the form of pizza and drinks. So last question quickly then, which is there a resource, a book, a speaker, anything that has inspired you specifically on this topic that you want to share? On the topic of
or just like creating and innovating? And
on the topic of creating sustainable change, and you can pick one or all of those words if you like. I will go first because I have a pre-formed answer as any good panel chair. So the work of Robert Putnam, who coined the term social capital, about which Alexa has actually written in our newsletters, I'm sure you've all read. He wrote a book called Our Kids in 2015, and if his original concept, which he wrote in the book called, his original concept of social capital, and the book was called Bowling Alone, was about this idea of the fabric of society kind of straining apart. His follow-up, Our Kids, was about the stratification of opportunity, particularly in American society, and basically the wealth divide and the wealth gap, and how the top third of wealth holders in the US are investing more than their parents in the education and community fabric of their children, and everyone else isn't. So it's creating this very difficult stratification, and so that makes me think of sustainability. It's one of the sort of driving ideas behind PACT, frankly, is the idea that we can and should be coming together more as people and perhaps rebinding that fabric, which I see as a sustainability topic.
I think there's one, I hope you can help me here, the documentary that we watched recently at the 2150 event. I've forgotten the name of the documentary, but I will share it with you. But it was an incredible documentary because it was just sort of like a professional videographer and photographer just filming in deprived areas of the world, developing economies, and like just videoing all the catastrophic environmental impact that because developing countries hit the worst, right? And it left like me feeling so sad afterwards, but it was just like in a visual way. There was no words, there was no facts, there was no science, it was just pure visuals. And it was really like impactful. I can't remember the documentary, which is super annoying.
I'm sure we can get it and we'll share it with
yeah, but I like to watch a lot of I read a lot of like entrepreneurship books or like a lot of founder books and things like that. So when I'm looking for the space about like sustainability and things, I like to like watch a lot of visual things like documentaries and stuff because I think that gives me like a bit more of an impact personally. I'm a bit more of a visual person. So I've always found documentaries, just visuals, like a lot more impactful for me and easier for me to share on. So like I remember I texted my parents afterwards, you need to watch this because I know then they're gonna like, okay, yeah. So that's my tip or advice.
We've just been sort of like magpies and seen lots of different things, kind of in all sorts of different places and kind of collected them all together. I thought kind of most interesting conversations we had were with kind of the guys at Greenpeace, who I don't believe with all of the things. I support all of the individual things that they campaign on, but the way they think about having to engage the large corporates at scale to make change and the practicalities of what it's going to take, I just found, I guess kind of changed my view of how you could make change and what could be achieved, and that the pragmatic reality of it. I find that kind of really inspiring.
I think the one I really love and listen to every week is The Diary of a CEO by Stephen Bartlett. And I think he just has amazing stories. Every week he interviews a new entrepreneur, spends an hour going really deep. He got the sort of CEO of Monzo to share all of his sort of anxiety and like how difficult his journey was all the way through to this week. He had someone called Scott Galloway on, and he was talking about the importance of community and how there's never been a worse time to sort of grow up as a young man because of a lack of community, and how we really needed to change that. So it's a huge breadth of topics from really inspiring people on a sort of weekly basis.
Great. Well, now we move to the bit that I'm most interested in, which is your questions, which I know you've all been storing up. So I'm just going to throw it open to the floor. We've maybe got 20 minutes or so before we move next door for some pizza and drinks to continue the conversation. Who's going to be brave enough to put their hand up first? Christoph.
Hi. Great session, you guys. I wanted to touch on something John mentioned before. For years, there was this conversation that if you are pro-sustainability, you are anti-business. And thank goodness that conversation is finally washing away. But there seems to be some relevance in it. And just out of curiosity, what are some of the ways in which you've confronted that challenge and been able to find your way through it? And what advice would you have for other entrepreneurs that find themselves confronted with that challenge when they bring on new board members and things like that that are somewhat old guard?
Yeah, and from the perspective of, I mean, I guess part of it comes back. One side of the argument is that in order to make this change, we have to be a viable, kind of profitable business, and so it's important we get that bit right. And then the other side for it was the more we talked to whether it was the team who worked for Innocent or the people who bought the product, how important this was. And when you looked at the hierarchy of reasons for why people worked at Innocent, number 1 or 2 was because we had a charitable foundation. We really didn't expect that. It was one of the most motivating things for people. I guess the more you dig into those audiences, the more you understand how important it is. So it's not just you speaking with your kind of own view, but it's where all your stakeholders are at, and therefore you have to kind of lean into it. But at the same side, you've got to balance that with being a viable business.
Other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks for the session. I'd love to probe on, I think it was your idea, Freddie, on kind of maybe entrepreneurial sustainability as well. Are we actually getting the talent of young leaders that we want and we need to get to the levels that we need, whether it's as a planet, environmentally, or kind of to create that change? And I guess from a VC side as well, do we see that pipeline of future business leaders that we need to be seeing?
So I think for my part, this is the thing I'm most optimistic about. I mean, I'm optimistic generally by nature about a lot of things, but the thing that I am most passionate about, most believe in is people, and is just in the kind of incessant ingenuity and creativity of humans and human beings. I mean, it's just the thing that really defines us as a species. And I think the problems get bigger, and in a way we see a lot more because of the technology, right? In a world where 5,000 years ago, or even 500 years ago, when your kind of immediate environment, 95% of people presumably didn't go much beyond their local town or whatever, and yet now today something happens in Korea and you've got it within 30 seconds or whatever. I think it can probably feel a lot more scary and a lot more immediate. But the flip side to that is, well, hold on, there's many, many more people on the planet, how many billion we are at the moment, and they're so much more connected. And the fact that we're all here this evening, we all know each other, we're all here this evening, this is all related to the fact that technology enables that. So I think humans plus technology equals fantastic opportunity. And I think what technology has done specifically is it's lowered the barriers to entry, it's lowered the cost. So it's now easier, to give you practical examples, it's easier for us, for me to meet with investors, to communicate with them over Zoom, to raise the money for Patch, whatever it might be. Presumably it's easier and cheaper for Merva to assemble bikes and batteries that are smaller and so on. So I'm very, very optimistic. I think that of all the issues that may be present, I think people are not one of them. I think that's actually our most exciting asset.
I think we were talking about this on the way here about the talent of that we're being able to attract, because young people and highly motivated and smart people really want to solve climate change problems, and that's something that we have a big advantage over a lot of companies that are not, have a climate angle to them, because the amount of talent that we're getting, incredible talent, and just people really are passionate about this problem and want to work for companies that are solving this problem in some way. So there's a lot. There's a bright future of quite a few people, I think.
And I think there's so much infrastructure now in terms of incubators and accelerators and investors and programs and mentoring. When way back starting Innocent, as we went around trying to raise money, we're going to speak to people. At the end of the meeting, they'd say, "Would you like some petrol money?" I mean, no one was taking sort of early startup seriously. It wasn't seen that you could go anywhere or have an impact. Whereas now we're in a world where we know that these tiny things can very quickly become huge, great forces, and people want to support that.
I think there's something else in that, because quite a few years ago now, I was working for Unilever on household products with a new technology team, and I guess I've always been quite passionate about the environment, and we were noticing, doing a lot of early stage research with consumers, they really wanted natural products. And I was looking at all the EU directives around packaging, which were coming on stream, and brought all this back in a big report to senior management, and showed them also a lot of trend research about households and how households were changing. At the time, they were very pitched on a very nuclear families, which we knew was shifting, loads of single households coming on stream, all this kind of stuff. And presented, so some senior managers were very excited by it and could see the potential. A lot of the others were, this is a total niche market, no interest, we're not going to invest. It's going nowhere, keep up with the chemicals, all the... and also, what you were saying is interesting about supply chain. If you start changing the bottles, the footprint of the bottle has a massive impact on the supply chain and what's going to fit on a supermarket shelf, so all this kind of stuff going on. I left. I've done other things. And what's really interesting for me now is seeing what happened after I went. And one of the things that they did do is, as more and more people have started buying things and putting their money with Ecova, Method, various other things, what do the big companies do? They just buy those companies out. So rather than having to invest themselves in all the early stage new technology, they wait to see, actually, is this going to be profitable? How many people are actually buying this stuff? And then they can kind of get involved at that stage. That's me being a bit cynical, but I think that is interesting to think about, and what happens when you build something to a scale where you're then selling it off, and how do you maintain your principles?
Well, I mean, Coca-Cola is innocent, right?
Yeah.
So, the company that we set out to say they're selling sugar and,
But it's interesting, isn't it? And how much can you impact them? It's still,
I was intrigued by that. Has Innocent influenced the way that Coca-Cola operate now from a sustainability perspective?
So, I mean, I guess Coke does far more than people think it does, and to higher standards than often Innocent was doing in places. So that was the kind of first surprise, because they can't afford to get it wrong because of the scale and kind of value in their brand. Having said that, the thing that Coke found hardest once they bought Innocent was to stop the tourism of all the rest of the Coke organisation descending on it to go and kind of see this organisation. So they had to appoint someone who was the head of interference, whose sole job was to stop people coming into Innocent, into Fruit Towers. So they said, "We'll kill you just with the tourism, the new thing, because everyone wants to learn, and so we'll appoint someone to stop it."
But my response, if I may, Katie, to what you said, actually links to the question earlier, and I think that incentive is not. I actually think that might be a productive model, as you say, the Unilevers of the world waiting for Ecova because actually what it does is it spurs on more Ecovas to exist, if that makes sense.
well, and also at the end of the day, I'd rather, if more. I mean, what you get is scale, isn't it? When a company like that takes somebody.
Yeah, I mean, Innocent's selling more juice now.
Exactly. So I think it's one of those things you can't be overly precious about it. But then there is a bit of me that remembers doing a lot of field work. I went all over the place looking at how people did household cleaning, and somebody using a bit of coconut husk and ash. Oh, it's still a dilemma, isn't it? Like, are you better off selling them detergent, or should we all be trying to use more? Yeah, I don't know. It's just.
But ultimately, the big companies will go where the consumers go. So it is up to us to demand stuff and buy stuff, and You know.
And that's where your community thing is interesting to me, because I think a lot of the conversation tonight is talked more about technology and the business and less about the people who are actually using the stuff. And I think that to me is something interesting about what you're doing here, and I guess trying to move towards a model which is seeing people less as consumers and more as whole people and whole individuals. I think the consumer thing is quite narrow, and that's where I'm quite interested in. I don't know, I haven't really kind of explored it enough in my mind, but I think there's a shift that needs to happen, particularly around consumer goods, where you start to think about people as less just consumers of your product and something broader.
Part of a bigger ecosystem. Yep.
Can I just add something while we're on this point, and it's the same with John, and this isn't an interrogation, I'm just curious. So I've got a B Corp. Well, we're B Corp pending actually because we're a start-up. And I know firsthand what we had to go through as a small business, and I know that when you're trying to retrofit a massive business to re-engineer to be B Corp, it's a real challenge. One of the good things about B Corp is I think that the environmental angle, that's really easy for everyone to, I don't know, offset carbon and whatnot. But what B Corp does do is it makes you think about like the integrity of your supply chain, for instance. Are you buying it locally? Is it minority-owned businesses? Like D&I and all of these different facets as to who you buy from and what the wider supply chain is that supports your product. So I'm kind of curious that if you then sell out to a big company like Coca-Cola, they're the world's biggest polluter from a plastic perspective. Can you still maintain the integrity of the brand if you're part of, or do you then have to then move into like their supply chain and use their suppliers for producing bottles or their suppliers for logistics, etc., that might not necessarily be conducive with B Corp?
Yeah, so I mean, for Innocent, Coke is the owner. They're a shareholder, but Innocent is a separate organisation with its own chief exec and team and supply chain and its own factory. And if it wants to use, leverage some Coke stuff, it can, but it kind of doesn't have to. And so, for B Corp, that looks at that entity on its own. And
so B Corp do then. So B Corp do then look at the impact score, for instance, for your supply chain 12 months later, once you've been acquired by a bigger company that perhaps not B Corp.
Well, your B Corp is continually reassessed and the bar raises every year. So you don't get it. I mean, this is the thing: it is not a process. It's a painful process. You don't go through it once and say, "I've got it. I'll put the certificate."
It's not like a driving license.
You have to keep reviewing it. And you have to keep improving your score every year, and they keep raising their bar every year. And kind of that's tough. Especially if you're you can get a lot of points by, for example, being a charity, but as soon as you're not giving away all the profits, you're going to have to work very hard across everything to maintain it. So
yeah, but I think my question was more:
how do the practices change once you?
Is it really difficult then to maintain the integrity of your brand once you are, once there's other stakeholders that don't necessarily have your ideals?
No, I mean, for us it was as we sold the company, it was kind of a red line of this is what Innocent stands for. It has these facets, part of which is its kind of sustainability and its charitable foundation and the kind of product formulation. And if you mess with those, you might as well not call it Innocent. And they kind of looked at us and said, well, that's why we're buying you guys. You worked out that formula, that so we're not going to mess with that. That's what we're going to protect. And that was their pitch to us. And they've now had control for 10 years, and it is a stronger version. It wasn't B Corp under my watch. Since Coke owned it, it's gone through that.
Right,
So the product is now produced in a totally self-sufficient factory through solar and wind and heat pumps. It can be completely self-contained. That was all built with Coke funding. So they have only made it a stronger version of what it was, which I definitely didn't expect when they first said, "I hear you guys are raising money. We'd like to pitch." We were like, "Whoa!"
I think my personal view is not all there's like this rhetoric that big business is bad business, and I do think that there are companies that maybe historically have not done as well as they could, but they recognise that they could do better. And it's very, very difficult to go back and eradicate all of the bad that, I don't know, like a Coca-Cola might have, you know, from an impact perspective. But what they can do is they can invest in businesses that are doing better or doing good things, and they can kind of dilute or diversify like their portfolio of ownership.
Yeah, they've been around for.
Unilever earlier, they bought Ben and Jerry's, which is a bit controversial. But
I don't think they're being quite as kind.
I mean, you could argue that as like a marketing thing.
The most controversial thing I can do this evening is stand between everyone in this room and the currently warm pizza that is sitting next door. So there's time for one more question if anyone has it, and I'm sure there must be at least one.
Well, I suppose it's a follow-up from what's just been said really. We've got a brilliant opportunity through the creation and founding of new businesses, new entries into new markets or creation of a completely new sphere of operation. But it's highly unlikely that we're going to lose some of the big brands, big industries, big public services, which have all been built in a very different era and a very different way of working. And I suppose I'd be interested in the panel how we can influence and change those behaviours, not just from consumer point of view, but actually from a state point of view, to set us up better for the future. Because the conversation that's being had around 1.5 global warming, quite frankly, we can do that in a small startup perspective. We can't change these bigger models fundamentally.
There's room for another contrarian view here, which is, I don't know to say this, but direct action feels like one of the emerging tools that is becoming more and more, I wouldn't say just used, but also I would say accepted. I think I don't know, I get everyone else's views on this, but it doesn't feel as controversial to me now, the idea that stop oil protectors. I mean, I'll be honest, I see all the stop oil protectors gluing themselves to the road, and I think, well, apart from ambulance, it's good on you. Kind of like, I sort of think to myself, like, yeah, we're sort of at this point where, like, it's not an optional thing. We can't just dance around it and be like, okay, well, things are fine, and don't worry, we'll work it out, and let's be nice about it. Like, I can see a case for, very dodging my language here, but I can see the case for, I think it is becoming more accepted. Some others may say, but I don't know if anyone else has either reactions to the question or to the.
I think reaction to the question, what you said about sort of the big companies, and I think they're leaning in and learning from a lot of these smaller companies. One of our investors is Maersk Growth, right? And Maersk are like one of the largest emitters ships, right? And they have a growth arm and investment arm that just focuses sort of like decarbonisation of transport on the land and things like that. And they actually lean into a lot of what we're doing on like, how are you electrifying this and how do you do this? And then they put us in touch with members of their team because you teach them. So I do think there's, like, goes back to my point earlier, like sometimes we're too scrutinising on these companies. They've been around for a while. The science companies, big companies are changing, maybe slower than what we need them to change. And some are going quicker than the others, but they are trying to change, and I think we just have to be a bit kinder and also teach them and help them along that way.
They are greenwashing though, a lot of these.
Some of them are, but definitely there
are bad actors in everything.
Yeah.
But I think actually the majority are doing a better job than we as consumers kind of give them credit for.
Camilla, any final thoughts from you before we release?
No, I think I would reiterate that point. I think some of them are doing a better job, and they just don't talk about it quite as much. But.
Well, and they can't talk about it because everyone's going to, they're 1,000 times bigger, so they're going to be looked at 1,000 times harder. So they are now so cautious about saying anything. It is, it's easy as a small company. Innocent, when we were small, we tried all sorts of things that we would shout about, that actually, in hindsight, were completely the wrong things to do. But we thought they were right, and if you were a big company and had gone down that route, you would have been crucified. But we were a little company; you can get away with these mistakes, and you can correct. So, fortunate.
Great. Well, on that note, we are fortunate to have had you all here this evening. So, just a quick couple of notices before we say thank you to our panelists. The first, you can probably guess, is to remind you that we have other events here at Patch. But we also invite all of you to bring your events, your activities. These are public spaces for you to
to use, to hire. We've got Market through there, which is about to go through to Academy in here, of course, Workspaces, etc., etc. I'm sure you can ask us all about it. Big thank you to the Patch team and specifically to Naomi and Elle, who I will embarrass, who are, of course, responsible for running Chelmsford Patch on a day-to-day basis. And finally, next door we have some food and drink. We are asking for a bit of help to cover the pizza, so there's a sort of £3 all-you-can-eat donation option. So I don't know, and then drinks the post as well. I can guarantee you we won't be making any money on it. Help us out a little bit. It is delicious. And I think that's probably all that needs to be said, other than a huge thank you to all of you for coming, and also to Camilla, to John, and to Merva for their time this evening.